Good morning, everyone. This is Backyard Reads, and today we're talking about, we're reviewing The Eternal Champion by Michael Moorcock of the Eternal Champion sequence, Book 1. Now, to start off, I don't have the other books in this series. However, if I was to say, I would say that you can read this by itself and it would be almost completely fine, right? It's a very standalone book. Now, I do want to read the other ones, but and I did get this from Amazon, and it's a really good book. That's going to be the first thing I say, and blah blah blah. Yeah. One thing I would say is that it's a book series. It's a type of books. To begin off, Michael Moorcock is a very prolific writer. He's like written 80 stories or something, and he's a very old man. He's living in Texas or something. One thing is that all his books, fantasy and science fiction, are all linked in the same world. Right, or rather the same universe. It's sort of like a multiverse, akin to the Cosmere, or akin to the Cosmere more than, say, Marvel, right? Because most people, when they hear like a multiverse, they think Marvel, but that's a shared universe, not a multiverse. It's a different thing. A multiverse being there are different worlds that kind of share, where characters can crisscross, or stories can crisscross each other, right? And like Michael Moorcock was, you could say that Michael Moorcock was one of the first novelists to try and a multiverse like that, like long before like Brandon Sanderson is trying to make his Cosmere, right? While Brandon Sanderson is actually pretty ambitious to try to make a huge Cosmere like that, especially with so many of them being as big books as they are. I would say that one thing is that if you're a modern reader, is that you have no idea how many books that's going to be. He says about 60, and it's about 40 books or so. I don't know. So that's going to still be a long time before he actually finishes that. But in the meantime, if you wanted to experience something like that, you could do you could do Michael Moorcock's books, and you can get the general feel of it. Now, to really get that being said, this is actually a very good introduction into that sort of mindset, because it starts off with the main character who is starts off as John Daker, a man of the 20th century who lives in London, right? And you can see, and that he is called upon to this world, like a sort of another Earth-like world, as the Erekose reborn, where Erekose is this figure that has existed in this alternative sort of Earth for thousands of years before, and he's been summoned back because humanity desperately needs. And throughout the book, it's a very simple first-person read, and it's about humanity against the Eldren, right? The Eldren are these sort of elf-like beings, almost Tolkien-esque. I say almost, because there's a lot of differences between the two. And you could say that this is about these. It's like, if I was to talk about themes, though I'm not very well versed with the ideas of themes and all that, or talking about it. One thing is that Michael Moorcock's work it goes about the futility of war, about like war, the cycle of violence, genocide and the failure of communication, right? That's what this kind of book is mostly about, right? But it's also about immortality and reincarnation, yeah. Because you find that a lot in this book, Erekose, the main character, is constantly having to go like, wait, is this me? Is this a dream? Am I? And it's him having to contend with the fact that he is essentially, truly immortal, like he will never die. And you'll find that there's references to other characters in other books, right? And it's a very interesting sort of read, and like it's something that I think a lot of people should definitely get into, especially if they love like multiversal fantasy or sci-fi. They would love Michael Moorcock's works, and especially if it's a blending of sci-fi and fantasy, because you find that in almost everything. One book that I do want to read, that I've listened to as sort of an audiobook, but not as read as a book. I don't have access to the audiobook anymore, which is kind of a shame. It is of Elric of Melniboné. I think I said that right. It references that character in this book, and it references Hawkmoon, and I think several other characters in this book. And I believe the other part, like book 2 and book 3 of the Eternal Champion sequence, from what I read, from the back covers that I read, is like another life in another world where it's slightly different, and he has to tackle a slightly different problem. And it's about this thing of war and conflict, having to deal with war and conflict and chaos and law throughout the series. It's very philosophical in that way, where it's about absolute law versus absolute anarchy. You know, tyranny versus anarchy. If that's what right? And it's very beautiful, and it's an interesting sort of story. You know, you don't really hear that sort of talking point when it comes to books or to stories in general. Of like, what does absolute law look like? Well, it's absolute tyranny. It's this horrible world where no one can do anything because there's law everywhere. It's this absolutely oppressive thing. Whereas with anarchy, absolute anarchy is like horrific in itself, because you can't live your life. All these things just happen, and then you just can't do anything, and you just can't build or make a life. It's really quite sad. But anyway, with this book, you find that there's like the main character Erekose has to resolve this conflict between humanity and Eldren, and he is to be humanity's champion. And you find that not all as it seems. Him having to like getting into this depressive rut of like having to fulfill this sort of promise that he makes very early on, and you see the absolute misery that he goes through, and how he becomes a shell of himself, and how just this war can actually how this war seems utterly pointless and evil and mean-spirited, and that he really does, and that he has this sort of understanding that so many of the humans that surround him lack, and that he has this sort of this empathy that's very beautiful, and yeah, it's very nice. One thing that I would say is, one reason why I would recommend this book to people is that the chapters are very short. Like, it can be like several pages at most, yeah? Like 3 pages or 6 pages. But there's like, if you include the prologue and the epilogue. If you include the prologue and the epilogue, it's like 27 segments long, right? And so you can have this book on you at any point, and you can just read it for you can read a single chapter, and then just put it away, get along, and then do something else, and then read another chapter, and another, completely at your leisure. And so you don't have to read like some of these books that have chapters of like 20 pages long or 30 pages or something, which can be very off-putting to first-time readers, I would imagine. Like, if you wanted to get into fantasy, you can't go wrong with this. That is generally my review of the Eternal Champion, and I can't recommend it enough, and it's very good. It's a sort of sword and sorcery, and like, if you like Conan the Barbarian and you like Fritz Lieber's work and all that, you can get a lot of enjoyment out of this as well. Though Conan the Barbarian has a slightly different tone to it. But anyway, that's my review, and have a very lovely day.